So let's welcome Russell this morning. Lead us on.
Well, good morning, men. Good morning and welcome to session 4 of The Great Adventure. I really like being back in this room. Well, last week where we kind of left off, we said we'd gotten to base camp, right? And one of the unique things about base camp in the great mountains of the world is they always position base camp far enough away from the mountain that you can still see the summit. Kind of the last place, because most major mountains, most big mountains, there's a certain point as you start climbing, you can't see the peak anymore. You can't see the summit. You can't see your objective because you're just so close to it, you're in on the climb. And that's a lot like our lives are. And so what we said last week was that we had gotten to base camp. We have clearly seen the summit. Now we're going to work and try to see that even clearer. But for some of us, we're not going to see a clear vision of the base camp. We just have to remember what we saw as we climb to keep us motivated along the way. And one of the ways we do that is to get our wiring straight before we start climbing. So when we're in the heat of the battle and we're just kind of deciding if we're going to go another hard day on this climb, we just go back to our wiring and we say, that wiring we know is right and we're going to trust it in the tough decisions. On big peaks, the last thing you want to be doing is making major decisions at 8,000 meters because nobody makes good decisions in those situations. That's the same for us. You need to trust the plan you come up with. That's why the wiring's so important this morning. You know, just to give you a little story, we found out for the most part you guys don't like my dancing. We found out that you really don't even like my stupid jokes. But so far, you guys have enjoyed some of my stories. So I'll start out this morning with a story about my first experience with wiring and really electricity. I was 6 years old, and we had a cow. We lived out in the country, and we got a new cow every year, and the next year he was in the freezer, and we got another new cow. And cows, we had a wooden fence. I think my dad liked the look of a, kind of a wooden fence, maybe a little classic looking, but it's terrible for cows because they just come lean on that thing till finally they just bust the planks off or bust the fence posts off. And so my dad came up with a solution. He found this great invention one day down at the tractor supply place, and he comes home with this electric fence. And boy, we installed that thing, the transformer, and ran the wire and got that all up there and plug it in and go, this ain't gonna work. And sure enough, it did. Cows came over to kind of lean on the fence and he got shocked, and man, that was just perfect. As long as that electric fence was working, the cow stayed in. But it regularly, just for different reasons, just would stop working. I think it was kind of an early generation, and cows would get out, they'd end up in the neighbor's garden or just going down the street. And so my dad wanted to make sure that we tested it regularly. And he wasn't really sure how to do that, so he came up with a brilliant plan. At least he thought it was brilliant. It was just my brother and I, and so what my dad wanted was somebody to test that fence every day by going out and touching it. And so one day it was my day, and then the next day it was my brother's day, and then the next day it was my day, and this went on for a couple of years. Now let me tell you, it was your day to go out there and touch that electric fence. Boy, you learned how to just savor your Fruit Loops or your Frosted Flakes and just kind of whatever it took to drag Bud around. And then you'd go out and test the fence. And one day, so this is just going on, I just thought that's the way life was, just every other day you're going to get a hell of a shock. And some of you guys know me, you're going, that's explaining a lot. So one day we're at the tractor supply, and we're down there, and I'm just kind of going up down the aisles. And I love going in there. That place had tools and just smelled a certain way and had saddles and stuff. I just love being in there. And I come across this product that's on the shelf, and I just went, could this be? And I took it up to the counter, and I said, is this what it says it is? And I'm like 8 years old. He said, yes, son. That's an electric fence tester. Really? And my heart just sank. I got hopeful and it just sank because I knew that there's no way we could afford that tester. Because if we could, surely my dad would have bought that thing for us, right? So I asked the guy, I said, how much is it? It's $1. $1. So I whipped out $1 and I bought us an electric fence tester. And we got our wiring a little bit better done that day, and life got a little better because of it. Well, this morning we're going to look at a wiring diagram. If you look in your workbook, there is a blank diagram. We're going to fill that in. Before I do that, I want to give you a definition, okay? of what a wiring diagram is. If you just looked up in the dictionary, here's what you'd find. It's a simplified drawing of an electrical system as an aid to construction and troubleshooting problems, helping ensure that all necessary components are present and that all the proper connections have been made. Wouldn't that be great to have that about our life, that we had an aid to construction, that we have something to help us troubleshoot problems, have something to help us make sure that all the necessary components are there and that all the proper connections have been made. We need a wiring diagram, because when we go out into the world, here's what we're really doing. Whether our world starts in the morning with kids in the house or we're heading out into work, what we're really doing when we get up and we start into our day, we're flipping the main breaker on our life. And we're energizing all of our wiring for good or bad. And we're about to find out if it's good or bad. And so is the rest of the world. So, let's get started in our wiring diagram. It starts with birth and design. That's a pretty obvious thing. Let me just be real clear, though, on that birth and design is more than just some biological thing that happened on your birthday in a hospital. Now, let me just give you a couple of verses here that show some of the importance of what happened the day you were born. Look at this first one. We've seen this one before. I want you to just look at it again, though. God created man, okay, we've been talking about that, in his own image. That's a fantastic statement. Or Psalm 139, it says, "You formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I am fearfully and wonderfully made." That's almost hard to believe. And this last one, which I think is the grandest of all, in Jeremiah, it says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." Guys, that goes way beyond the biology of your birth. That goes to a relationship, an intentionality that God had, a purpose for you, a desire for you and Him to have a relationship, even before you were born. And then He gave us more than just that. He gave us all a uniqueness. We had that birth, and He gave us uniqueness. Here's a great scripture on that. It just says, "We are His workmanship." Now, I did a lot of manufacturing, and these days, a lot of manufacturing is done through injection molds and stamping dies, and there's a lot of just kind of automation in the whole thing. But back when this was written, "You are His workmanship," everything was a one-off. It was an artisan who had a great purpose, because it took a lot to make something. And he took all the time and effort to carefully craft this unique thing. Even if he wanted to make a second one, he'd have to start all over, and the second one and the first one would still have differences in them. We each have different capacities and talents and preferences and abilities. Just to show the distinction, I think, from where the kind of the regular world tries to tell us, and really a great thing, the Declaration of Independence says that we are endowed with equality, and that's a great thing. But the Bible goes way beyond that, and it says we're endowed with uniqueness. And that has a lot to do, guys, with our self-worth, because we all have need for self-worth. We all need to look in the mirror and see something that, frankly, we're proud of, we're happy with, that gives us confidence to go through the day. My question simply is, you just kind of take that hat of self-worth, and what are you hanging it on? Are you hanging it on the things that you have? You know, I have the right house, I have the right car, I have the right wife, I have. Are you hanging the things on you that you do? You know, I'm the star quarterback, I'm the best student, I'm the smartest guy at work, I've got a prestigious job. Is that where you're putting your self-worth? And just to be honest, we all are doing that. I'm doing that. But what I would say is, that's a poor place to hang it, because all that stuff's going to come crumbling down. There's always somebody smarter. You're always going to just fade a little bit. The glory's going to fade. And if that's what you've hung your hat on, here's what you're going to be. Because the reason I'm saying this, we've been talking a lot about posers and trying our best not to be one. There's nothing in here that just kind of makes us retch more than seeing a guy who's a poser. And the thing that's really tough about is every one of us sees that in ourselves just a little bit. And where you're seeing it is the places where you've put your self-worth on the things you have and the things you do. And if you do that, you're always going to be a poser. It's the root of it. You can't do one and not have the other. It's cause and effect. So if you don't want to be a poser, we need to hang our hat on self-worth on something that's more dependable than us, more eternal than us. And that's what God's telling us here. God's saying that no matter what the world says, no matter what your past says, no matter what your present says, to God, He says you matter to Him. That's a big thing. On the other end of our birth and design, we have a death and a legacy and a destiny in eternity. I'll just give you another kind of fantastic scripture as we're going down there, just what God kind of thinks about death, because a lot of us aren't real sure about it. Look what it says in Ecclesiastes. The day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. That's just really, I mean, unless you're in a certain place about what you believe about what's next, that statement just seems nonsensical. How could the day of one's death be better than the day of one's birth? And the only way that is if God is just as intentional about our death as He was about our birth. And He is. Now, what we have to decide is what happens to us when we die. That's a personal thing for all of us. I can't decide that for you. Your parents can't decide that for you. You have to decide what happens to you when you die. And that's a tough struggle. And I know a lot of us think, well, yeah, that is a tough struggle, and I don't think I'm going to have that struggle. I'm just going to decide not to decide. You just made a decision. And the real thing about that is not only is that kind of a cowardly way out, that's the fool's way out, because that's saying I don't have to think about that thing that I know is coming someday. And not thinking about it means it will never affect my life. That's foolish, because it's going to affect your life. You just get to decide how. All right, in between birth and death, we've got a life, and we're just going to call those pursuits, because in the grand plan, we would be born, and then we would have pursuits, and we pursue a life based on our unique design and our unique purpose in a way that it made us come alive. And then we would have a death, and that death would leave a legacy in this world, and it would have a destiny in the next world. Okay, and that would be the perfect world. We could just get our wiring. We wouldn't even have to understand it in a perfect world, because that's just the way it would happen. But we don't live in a perfect world. And so we need a wiring diagram so that we know how to get wired properly, and then along the way how to repair, how to fix, how to rewire. And a lot of us, most all of us, since we're on in life, even the youngest ones here, we're having to do some of that along the way. Just to see that this, we've got kind of a comprehensive plan we're working on here these few weeks. We've been talking about those big, hairy questions. Remember those? Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Well, it's real simple to line those up. Birth and design, who am I? Pursuits, our life, why am I here? Death and legacy, where am I going? You guys see that? It just all lines up. Because in this life, when we're here today, as Tim was talking about, and the movie clip showed, we have a past, we have a present, and we have a future. And first we want to look at our past. Okay, that's the column here. And in our past, we have positive and negatives, and we're just calling our past carryovers. Because when we have negatives in our past, they'll carry over into our present. If we have positives, they carry over. Okay, that's pretty simple, but guys, that's really powerful. To understand that, to believe that, and do not minimize that. And for some of us, we have things in our past that are both positive and negative. Now, a lot of you guys see me here every week with my dad, who sits up front and is one of the great servants here that makes sure we get our donuts and does a lot of things to help pull this team off. And you see the relationship that we have, and it's a great one, but it wasn't always that way. And we started out in life with some positives and some negatives. Positives, some of the positive things were, my dad taught me an incredible amount of things. Do you know that when I was 16 years old, you could take me onto a vacant lot, give me a few tools and some building materials, and I could build a house from scratch, all by myself. I could do the foundation, I could do the framing, I could do the plumbing, I could do the wiring, I could do the sheetrock, the cabinetry, all the stuff that went in there, the roofing, the landscape, everything that went in the house. And the reason I know that, because at 16 years old, my dad put me on a vacant lot with a few tools and some building materials and said, build a house. And I did it. And I did that for several years in a row. And I was able to do that because he just poured in me for years the investments of how to do that. And that was an enormous positive carrying over my future. More than just building houses, it gave me a freedom that I knew wherever I ended up on the planet, I could just show up someplace and I could provide for my family. Because every place on the planet, you can make a living if you know how to build a house or fix a house or remodel a house. And that was an incredible thing, not only for the confidence it gave me, but just the security that I knew that. And it allowed me to take some risks. It gave me a real freedom to take some risks, to start some businesses that I may not have started if I thought, man, I can't risk financial failure, because I knew I had that in my back pocket. Now, on the other end of that, we had some negative carryovers. My dad and I had a tough relationship growing up. We didn't get along very well. And some of that was on my dad and some of that was on me. And we were just kind of at war with each other. And as I got older and left home, we kind of turned that war into just a negotiated truce. But we still didn't have a relationship. And that left a hole in his heart. And that left a hole in my heart. And it was really infecting my present. It was infecting the way I was parenting my kids and loving my wife. It just wasn't a good situation. And I was able, just really, guys, through men's fraternity, that's why I'm such a fan of men's fraternity, that's why I'm standing here, because it taught me how to go back and take that enormous negative and turn it into a positive. And that was one of the toughest things I'd ever done in my life. And it was one of the best things I'd ever done in my life. My dad and I built a relationship. We got to know each other. I got to know who he was and who he had been. And he got to do the same about me. We got to recapture a lot of what was lost. And I was 35 years old when we started that process. He was a couple years older. Here's what I'd say right now. Some of you guys have got some wounds and some unfinished business from your past. And I'd say in particular, you've got to be able to ask this question. I'd say even around the group today, can you look other guys straight in the eye and say, I'm clear about my relationship with my dad and there's no unhealthy, unfinished business there. Basically, I don't have a father wound. You got to get that cleared up in your life, or that's just going to infect everything. I'm sorry, I wish I'd give you an easier answer. That's just the reality of the way we're wired as men. And particularly for some of you guys here, you experienced a divorce growing up. And you took an arrow to the heart. Maybe you felt like it was a whole quiver you took to the heart. And all I'm asking is, have you dealt with that in a way that it's not infecting your present life? Or some of you guys, rather than take an arrow to the heart through a divorce, you shot an arrow to the heart in a divorce because you caused the divorce. And you shot arrows in the heart of your children. And I would ask you, because you can't just walk away from that. That stays with you the rest of your life. It doesn't go away. Your question is, how's it going to affect the rest of my life? Have I gone back and dealt with it in a healthy way? You got to get real with that, guys. Because we've all caused wounds. We've all received wounds. What are they doing to our present day? So let's look at our present day. Because in our present day, we've got problems and we got convictions. And the convictions I'm just going to call stabilizers. And here's all I'd ask about convictions. Let me ask some questions. I know I've already seen some heads nodding. Yeah, I got some convictions. Got them, baby. And so here's a 3-question test. Could you write them down? Still nodding heads. Second, could the people who know you best, your friends and your family, could they write them down? A little less nodding. And the last one, could the people who don't know you very much at all, your people at church, at work, your neighbors, could they write down your convictions? Because for it to be a conviction, there would have to be enough evidence out there to actually convict you of those convictions. No evidence, no convictions. It's just one of those impotent value statements that we see in businesses all over that don't mean a thing because they just run their business just the opposite. And we laugh at those. Problems. We've all got problems, and problems we'll just call destabilizers. Conviction stabilizers, problem destabilizers. Problems are not the problem. We all have problems. The problem is how we handle the problems. Do we face them head on? And the two ways I'd say facing them head on is, guys, you need a personal board. Now, for a lot of y'all, I know that's starting with your small group, and I hope that'll continue. But you need 3 or 4 guys that you just say, this is my personal board, and they know you. And you've given them permission to speak into your life. And so when you have a problem, you don't come to them like, laying on a therapist's couch and just whining about all the crap going on in your life. But you sit down and say, guys, there's an issue I'm dealing with, and y'all are working on a solution together. And then they hold you accountable to that. How'd that go last week? I want you, try that and let us know. Call me. Those are the guys that you need in your life because they'll help you turn your problems into actually a positive thing. And occasionally you're going to need to step out and find some expert help. Maybe a money expert or a marriage expert has just more expertise than your board may have. And that's a great thing. You need to do that. Here's what I'm saying. Face all those things head on. Then they become an issue, not a problem. And when you go and do that with an expert, here's one thing I would say though, don't do that in isolation from your board. Whatever the expert tells you and y'all kind of craft a solution or a way forward, bring that back to your board and run that by them because the expert may have some real expertise, but he doesn't know you and he's not going to hold you accountable like your board will. And we need that as guys if we're going to get over these problems. All right, let's go at the end. Let's look at future plans here. Future plans, we have dreams and we have purposes. Now, to help get our plans going, we've got 2 tools we're going to develop this year. You really are going to develop them. We're going to set you up and help you go through that. The first one is called a life focus chart that we'll start here in just a couple of weeks. The second one, Tim's going to take us through during the Your Unique Design part of this year in January, and that's called a personal mission statement. Remember, I mentioned that again last week and even the first week. You'll have for you this personal mission statement, which is your plans for life. Because we all need something pulling us forward. If not, we're just going to hover around and wander around, and the world's just going to kind of act on us, and we're going to react to that. And mostly we're going to react to that because we're going to do the things we just feel like doing in any given moment. Or we're going to do the things that anesthetize the pain from our past. And that's no way to live. So let me tell you about dreams just a little bit. Dreams are a good thing, but you need to dream informed dreams. They need to be informed because they're informed by who you are and who you're not. All right? Dreams that make you come alive. So even if you never even achieve the dream, it's such a dream about that's focused on knowing who you are that even the journey towards that dream makes you come alive. That's what a dream does for you. The other end of that is fantasies. Fantasies are crafted ignorantly, and they don't work. And the road to them is usually fraught with all kinds of havoc and destruction and things. Remember I talked about last week or a couple weeks ago, I can't remember, about all the stuff we saw that in Jackson Hole. We lived in a place with a high fantasy value. So we saw people coming out there because they wanted to just chuck it all. And they did. They chucked their wife, their kids, their job, everything to come out to Jackson Hole because, man, that's the life I always wanted. And they hated it because it was a fantasy. It wasn't a dream. Purposes. We've talked about our purposes in a lot of ways. We'll talk more about those. But big picture-wise, we've been talking about these 4 purposes: the family adventure, the noble adventure, the man adventure, and the God adventure. And just one little point of clarity for the man adventure. When I've talked about the man adventure, and I've talked to some of you guys, there's a little confusion that works as far as recreation goes. Recreation's a great thing. Hear me say that. Recreation's a great thing. We all need it. Especially if you use it in the true form of the word, recreate. We need that. But recreation and the man adventure are 2 different things. They can be one and the same, but usually they're different because the man adventures, here's the key characteristics. Unlike your favorite bass fishing spot or your favorite duck blind or deer stand or your favorite TV show or ball game or coffee shop, those are all great things. But unlike those, your man adventure has got 3 things going for it. It's an exploration of some kind for you, whether that's a mental exploration, learning something new, learning how to do something new with your hands, or you're literally going out and exploring some real territory in the world. It's got exploration involved in it. And then it's also got challenge involved to it. It's stretching you. And then the third thing is, you're doing it with some other dudes. Okay? You're not doing it alone. You got other men that are exploring and challenging with you. All right, so we got our diagram here. We're going to test our wiring. Everybody hold up their pen or their pencil. Or if you don't, hold up a finger, preferably this one. Now, we're going to take it, we're going to test our wiring. We're going to put our wiring tester, all right, kind of like your electric fence tester so we don't get a shock. And we're going to put it over birth and design. I'm going to ask you some questions. Do you know the reality of your birth? Created or random chance? Do you know your design, your strengths, your talents? If you're clear on these things, you've got a positive charge. If you're unclear, unsure, you've got a negative charge. Okay, let's move over into the past category. Were you raised in a good home with love and great values? And right now you're utilizing that, drawing strength from that. That's a positive. Or maybe you were raised in that great home and you just rejected all that and just decided, I'm just going to figure life out on my own because I'm smarter than everybody else. And you made a mess of things. Oh, that's a negative charge. Do you have wounds and unfinished business from the past that's infecting the present? That's a negative charge. Or have you gone back and dealt with that unfinished business there? That's a positive charge. That's what my dad and I did. We had a negative charge, and we did the hard work. Some of the hardest things I've ever done in my life was getting back with my dad and try to fight through that distance that was between us. And he was fighting through from his end. It was one of the hardest things he ever did in his life. And both of us look back at that and go, that was one of the best things we ever did in our life. It changed both our lives. It filled that hole we had in our hearts that longed for each other. And I get to be because of that journey I went through, Robert Lewis and I started an outdoor adventure ministry out in Jackson Hole called Christ and the Tetons for that very reason, because I wanted other dads and sons to be able to close that gap. And one of the things that we do, besides just all the week of fun that we have out there, we have times for the fathers and the sons to just get better at being a dad, get better at being a son, and get better at being men. And one of the opportunities is for a dad to speak a blessing. There's 3 things that every son needs to hear from his dad. And there's an opportunity that we have for the dads to actually speak that blessing into their son's life. And it's a powerful moment. Even with the best relationships, it's a powerful moment. But we get relationships that are challenging out there a lot of times. You just see these guys, they're just repelling each other like 2 magnets. They show up at war with each other. I've had kids get out screaming, you made me come, but you're not making me get out of the cabin, kind of thing. I mean, it gets tough sometimes. And this summer we had an instance where a dad and his son, there was just this distance. We weren't sure everything that was going on. And he stands up there and they get up in front of the room and they put their dad just kind of faces his son and with this cloud of witnesses, the other men there. And he's just to speak life into his son. And the idea for the dads, and they love this, is I'm just pouring life out of my heart into my son's heart. That's a great thing. And dads just innately know that if there's a violent disconnect, a huge distance between them, they can do that and it just falls on the ground, worthless, or maybe even worse than worthless. It just opens up old wounds. And so this summer we had that situation, and a dad just showed some unbelievable courage, and he said, son, 10 years ago, I divorced your mom. And I left you. And I know now how much that hurt. How much that hurt you. Son, would you forgive me? Son, would you give me a second chance to be your dad? Because I want so much to do a better job. And in that moment, you had an unbelievable amount of courage from a dad. And then on the other hand, you had this incredible forgiveness from a son. And those two things, that's how you flip a charge, courage and forgiveness. Those two things flip the magnet. And rather than repelling each other, these guys were stuck together like glue. You couldn't believe the transformation that went on that week. And I've tracked with those guys. It just keeps continuing. And it's like they're just different people. It's an amazing thing when you turn a negative into a positive. All right, let's look at problems. We've all got problems. Remember we talked about that. Well, I'm sure, okay, we've probably got a couple people in here that are perfect, don't have any problems. Would y'all stand up? Now get out. Because we said we don't want any posers in here. We've all got problems, but we can turn our problems into a positive. You know, you started out with marriage and marriage was going great, and now, frankly, it's going in the tank. But you're getting some expert help and you're getting with your board and you're taking some steps to make your marriage better. That's a problem with a positive charge. Or on the other hand, your marriage is struggling and you're starting to notice another woman. That's a negative charge. And in the construction business, what we'd call that is you're sticking your finger in the light socket, your toe in the toilet bowl, and you're flipping the switch. And you're not going to like what you get. You better flip that charge. Are you struggling with money? Some of us just aren't good at money. But we don't know ourselves well enough, or we're just too arrogant to say, I'm not good at money. And the same level of thinking that got me into this money crap isn't going to get me out of it. I need some help. And you go get expert help and you're dealing with it and you've got a plan. That's a positive charge. Or you just say, I'm just going to figure it out. I'll gut it out. I'll get there. And you got a negative charge. Or convictions. Do you have convictions? Did you pass that test earlier? Positive charge. Let's go to plans. So we have plans here. Do you have definite plans that are pulling you forward? Positive charge. Do you know how you want to finish life? Positive charge. And here's what I'd ask about that little test. It's the day of your funeral. Guys are walking up and they're eulogizing you. Do you like what they say? Positive charge. Or do you not like what they say? Or even worse, there's nobody there to say anything? It's a negative charge. And even if you've got that negative at that moment, if you're thinking, but I'm moving in that direction, I'm making some progress. Well, that's a positive charge because it's not about perfection. It's about progress. Is your purpose clear? Positive. Or is it gray and vague, negative? Do you have dreams? Positive. Do you have fantasies? Negative. Guys, this is a real tool that you can use. And here's the first thing that an adventurer will do with this tool. He's going to find the short circuits and he's going to clear them up first. A coward won't do that. A fool will think that he doesn't have to. That stuff really won't bother him that much. But an adventurer, a courageous adventurer, goes to those places first and clears them up because he wants to live a life. And that's the only way to do it. All right, let me finish with 4 summary observations. You got them in your book there. Knowing my design is critical for understanding and rightly positioning my life. We're talking a lot about design, aren't we? We've been talking a lot about it. Guys, it's important, and we're going to talk more about it. Tim's really going to help us get into there and get some fruit on the other end of that. Do you remember last week, talked about the important thing for you young guys, and really for all of us, to know who you are and who you're not? And the reason that's so important is that the studies show us that 98% of successful people have one trait in common, and that's a high degree of self-awareness. Right? Remember we talked about that? And some of you came out and asked, but what do we need to be aware of? Do I need to be aware that the dog needs to go out to the bathroom, or I need to be aware that, my tie's got some soup on it? I mean, what is it I need to be aware of? Well, here's 3 things you need to be aware of. Just write these down. Write down IQ, comma, EQ, comma, PP. And here's what I mean by that. IQ, we all know about that, our intelligent quotient. Just what's our raw brain power, okay? Here's what the studies are showing us. 2 things. Look at me just for a second. Raw brain power is almost entirely from birth. The studies are showing that almost nothing you can do to increase it from the moment of your birth, all right? Now, you can do some things to harm it through drugs and all kinds of stuff, but to increase it, the baby Einstein stuff, things like that. I mean, I love people loving on their kids and investing in them, but that's not really going to increase their IQ. That's just what they're telling us. Nature versus nurture, it's pretty much nature. And some of you guys in here are going, crap. I just thought someday I was going to take that pill and be smart. Here's what the studies are also showing us, though. As a predictor of future success, IQ is 25% accurate. So I've had the 4 smartest guys in this room stand up right now. Stand up, 4 highest IQs. 3 of you are going to fail. If all you're doing is betting your success on your brain. It's just the way it works. I mean, you got a better odds to go down the fair and throw a dart at a balloon and hope you get a winner behind that. So what is important? Now, I'm not saying IQ is not important, but self-awareness. Again, knowing who you are, knowing who you're not. And if you know that you just don't have some raw intellect at times, well, you'll be aware of that. It doesn't bother you because you'll find a guy that does when you need it. Or you'll put that guy on your team, and every day you'll have that asset that you weren't born with. That's the great thing about a team. The next thing, EQ. What the studies are telling us about EQ. EQ stands for emotional intelligence. Now, I know in a room of guys, when I say the word emotion, I just flipped off about half your receivers because we don't know what to do with emotions. Just bear with me for just a minute, guys, because I'm going to tell you something about emotions that'll never make you squirm when you hear that word again. Remember I talked last week that emotions are a wonderful servant and a horrible master. I'm about to tell you how to master your emotions because you squirm because you're serving your emotions. EQ, emotional intelligence, what they tell us is 2 things again about that. Is EQ is a 75% accurate predictor of future success. Man, that is way better than IQ. 3 times, if you have a high EQ, you're more successful. And then the second thing they're telling us is EQ is almost entirely learned. You're not born with it. All the way up, they've done studies with people all the way up into their 90s to make significant progress in their EQ. So what is EQ? It's not some mystery. Let me just break it down. It's 4 simple things. It's first of all being aware of your emotions. Now again, I just switched some guys off. It sounded touchy-feely. If I was a color, what color would I be? That's not what I'm talking about. You need to be aware of the emotions you're feeling in a moment because if you're not aware of them, they own you. And then the next thing is you need to be, and there's skills, there's practices, there's simple things that you can do to become aware of that. This is a skill just like learning how to ride a bike. And then once you're aware of them, the second thing is that you know how to manage your emotions. So you're aware of your emotions, you can manage your emotions. Then the third thing is you're aware of the emotions of others, whether it's another individual or another group. That's an important thing. So in the room, you can sense what's going on. And that's not some sick spidey sense kind of thing we think women have. They just have this thing. They may have some of that, but it's because they've developed it. And we can develop it. It's a skill. And then the last thing is managing the emotions of others. That's an important skill to do. And that's not a manipulative thing. What you're doing is driving negative emotions generally. You're driving negative emotions to positive emotions. Just think for a second how many places that would help you be successful. How people would be drawn to you, how people would follow you, how people would listen to you if you could drive their negative emotions to positive emotions. Wouldn't you love to have that skill? That's called EQ. And you need to be aware of whether you have it or not. And if you don't have it, you don't find somebody that does, you become that. You just get better. And the last thing is PP, which stands for personality and preference. We need to know our personality. And what the studies show us that some of that was at birth and some of that is just gained through our life. We acquire some things and some preferences. And we're going to go through a lot of that in the unique design. And it's a great thing to know because it's so important to know that to be able to come alive. Because if you don't know what you like and what your personality's like in situations where you will thrive and have energy, in situations where you won't thrive because you won't have energy, well, how can you position yourself? How do you know what to say yes to? and how do you know what to say no to? So guys, when we go to this design stuff and being aware of that, it's really important. Observation number 2, the past is always with us, good or bad. I know everybody here in some place in their past would love to have an eraser. Those don't exist. No amount of money gives you an eraser for the past. Oscar Wilde put that this way. He said, no man is rich enough to buy back his past. And it's true. The question is not, is your past affecting you? It's how it's affecting you, for positive or negative. And even a negative from your past can affect you in a positive way. And again, I watched my dad do that. It's an amazing thing. My dad grew up in poverty in Minnesota. Dad left, and Mom was there with 6 kids, young kids. And all the kids had to work. I mean, they had to work real jobs to just try to provide for the basic needs of the family. Food, clothing, rent, that kind of stuff. I mean, it was a tough existence. And they worked really hard doing that. And one of the things that my dad always wanted was for my grandma, his mom, to have a house. And she never did. Years later, she got remarried, and the man she remarried had a house, but she never had a house. And my dad always wanted for his mom to have a house. In fact, he always wanted to give her a house. Well, you know what my dad did for a living for over 40 years? He was a home builder. And even beyond that, he focused most of his career on building starter homes. And I remember him just with passion. When he would give people, and he'd say this to me, I love giving people the keys to their first home. It was a noble thing, the keys to the American dream. And he'd get really almost choked up at that. And even when he was successful in building bigger houses, a lot more profit, he always built starter homes and just kept focusing there. And if you guys have ever seen that, there's no profit really in that. I mean, you got to count every nail and 2x4 to try to scratch out a living making starter homes. And so for him to do that, it was because he had this noble call, because when he was given a new family, a mom and a dad, the keys to their first home, who was he giving it to? That's right, he was giving it to his mom. I was giving Mom a home. It's a powerful thing that the past can affect you in positive ways. Observation number 3, how we see and embrace the future affects our lives much more than most of us know. I'm just going to leave that statement on its own because we're going to talk about that more next week. And finally, observation number 4. The wise adventurer always lives with the end in mind. Some of y'all are familiar with that phrase, live with the end in mind. Stephen Covey wrote an incredible book called The 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. An amazing book. Okay, if you want to be a better, more effective person, you just got to read that book. If you don't, you're just going to be deficient in some way. Read that book. And the second habit when you read it is to begin with the end in mind. Listen to what Stephen says about how powerful that is. To begin with the end in mind means to start with a clear understanding of your destination. It means to know where you are going so that you can better understand where you are now and what steps are always in the right direction. We may be very busy and very efficient, but we are only truly effective when we begin with the end in mind. So starting next week, that's where we're going to begin. Not with the past, that's where we're going last. Not with our design, that's where we're going last. Not with our present, that's where we're going next. But next week, we're going to begin with the end in mind. And we're going to explore the territory that's out there to see what we can discover.